7, 9, 11.
You know everything about the spleen now. So right now let us see about the spleen. Okay? सामने आ जाओ रे, सामने आ जाओ. इधर है ना जगह, इधर इधर आ जाओ. So coming to the spleen. Spleen is a lymphatic or lymphatic organ. Okay, or the lymphatic organ. So spleen is a hemolymphatic organ which belongs to the reticuloendothelial system. First thing what the examiner asks if you get a spleen is which system it belongs to.
Reticuloendothelial system.
It belongs to the reticuloendothelial system. First point, right? Now, the spleen lies in the left upper quadrant of the abdomen. It lies in the
Left upper quadrant of the
abdomen, right? And the other character of this spleen is like the spleen occupies the left hypochondrium and it extends into the epigastrium. It also extends into the epigastrium, right? So it lies in the left hypochondrium and also extends into the epigastric region, right? Now coming to the shape of the spleen. The spleen is wedge-shaped, which means that it is wedged between the fundus of the stomach on the medial side and the diaphragm on the lateral side. So hence it has got that wedge shape. Okay. And now coming to the other characteristic features of the spleen. The spleen has got like two poles or two ends, namely the anterior end and the posterior end, right? And three borders, namely the superior border, the inferior border and the intermediate border. It has got the superior border, the inferior border and the intermediate border, three borders and two ends. And also it has got two surfaces, namely the lateral surface or the diaphragmatic surface or the costal surface and the medial surface or the visceral surface. And it has two angles, namely the like the anterior angle, okay, anterior angle and the posterior angle, right? Anterior angle and the posterior angle. So finally, to say that spleen is a wedge-shaped organ, it is wedged between the fundus of the stomach and also the diaphragm, and it has got two ends or two poles, anterior pole or the anterior end and the posterior pole or the posterior end, and it has got three borders, namely the superior border, inferior border, intermediate border, and it has two surfaces, namely the visceral surface and the diaphragmatic or the lateral surface, and it has got two angles, namely the anterior angle and the now I'll call it as the anterobasal angle and the posterobasal angle. Okay, anterobasal and the posterobasal angles are there, right? Now let us see about each one. The anterior border of the spleen, right? Before going to the details, I wanted to tell the axis of the spleen. The spleen, the long axis of the spleen is directed downwards, forwards and laterally, where once it goes laterally, the long axis, it is directed downwards, forwards and laterally, where the anterior end will go and meet with the mid-axillary line. And at the level of this mid-axillary line, the long axis of the spleen will coincide with the long axis of 10th rib. It will coincide with the long axis of 10th rib. So which means that the long axis of the spleen and the long axis of the 10th rib, both are in same line. At same level, both will be parallel to each other. That is the position of the spleen or the axis of the spleen, right? Now let us see the anterior end. The anterior end of the spleen more likely appears to be a border than an end, because see, it is such a big one, right? And this is the anterior end or the anterior pole of the spleen, right? The anterior pole of the spleen, you can see here this upper portion. This is the main part which is palpable in case of splenomegaly. This is the main part, which is the anterior end, is the main part which is palpable. That too, especially if I say that is the anterobasal angle, right? Now this anterior end of the spleen has got two angles, namely the anterobasal angle and the posterobasal angle. Now coming to the posterior end of the spleen or the posterior pole of the spleen. The posterior pole of the spleen, you can clearly see that it is blunt and rounded. It is not like a border. It is blunt and rounded, right? The posterior pole is blunt and rounded. Okay. Now the anterior pole or the anterior end of the spleen is directed forwards downwards and laterally, while the posterior pole of the spleen is directed backwards, upwards, and medial. This is going just exactly to the opposite to the position of the anterior end. The posterior end is coming. That is the details of the two ends of the spleen. Now, coming to the borders, the superior border of the spleen, okay, is large one, and also this superior border is like marked by characteristic notches here. See, right? These are the splenic notches. Why these notches develop? Why it is developing over the superior end? Actually, coming to the embryology of the spleen does not develop as a single bud. It develops in the form of lobules. Small lobules will be there in the splenic lobules. All these lobules will coalesce or fuse together to form one structure or an organ called as a spleen. And while fusing, few of the lobes will fail to fuse at the level of the superior border. That is the reason why you develop this classical notch over the anterior end of the superior border. Am I correct? Near to the anterior side, right? So this notch is present over the anterior end of the superior border of the spleen. Now coming to the inferior border. The inferior border lies, inferiorly, right? And it is more related to the visceral organs, especially the left kidney. I'll tell you again. Now coming to the intermediate border. The intermediate border lies between the superior border and the inferior border, and this just above the intermediate border you will be seeing the hilum of the spleen. These are all the borders, right? Now coming to the angles, that is the anterobasal angle and the posterobasal angle. See carefully. The anterobasal angle lies between the superior border and the anterior end of the spleen. Am I correct? Yes. And this is the most palpable part of the spleen in cases of splenomegaly. Now coming to the posterobasal angle, see, the posterobasal angle lies between the anterior end and the inferior border of the spleen, right? This is called as the posterobasal angle. Fine. Now we have to see about the surfaces. One is the costal diaphragmatic surface or the costal surface. The diaphragmatic surface of the spleen is related, now to few ribs. I'll tell you now. And also, this is now separated from the costodiaphragmatic recess by the diaphragm. That is the left dome of the diaphragm. Coming to the other features of the diaphragmatic surface, the diaphragmatic surface is smooth. It is smooth and convex in shape. Am I correct?
Yes.
Now coming to the visceral surface. The visceral surface is irregular and it is concave. Am I correct? It is concave. Okay. So with this we have completed all the external features of the spleen. Coming to the most important thing, that is the dimensions of the spleen. The spleen is 1 inch in thickness, 3 inches broad, 5 inches long, 7 ounces in weight, and it extends between, it is related to 9th to 11th ribs, which means 9, 10, 11. So it is 1 inch thick, 3 inches broad, 5 inches long, 7 ounces in weight, 9 to 11 ribs. These are all the relations, right? Now let us see the relations, other relations of the spleen. Coming to the relations, again, as it is an abdominal organ, it will have two types of relations, namely the peritoneal relations and the visceral relations. Coming to the peritoneal relations, there are two important ligaments which are related to the spleen. You know very well that. One, very good. One is called as the gastrosplenic ligament, which extends from the hilum of the spleen to the greater curvature of the stomach, at the raya. Now, the second one is called as the lieno-renal ligament, which extends from the hilum of the spleen to the anterior surface of the left kidney. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Anterior surface of the left kidney. That is the lieno-renal ligament. Now, a 3 marks question is that there are few components in the lieno-renal ligament. What are those components? That is, the lieno-renal ligament contains the tail of the pancreas. Yesterday I told you, right? Recently.
Yes,
tail of the pancreas, the splenic artery, the splenic vein, and also the pancreatico-splenic group of lymph nodes and the sympathetic plexus of nerves. 5 components will be there, right? One is the tail of pancreas, pancreatico-splenic lymph nodes, and sympathetic plexus of nerves. These are all the structures which lies within the lieno-renal ligament. Clear? Now, coming to the visceral relations. The visceral relations, that is the lateral surface of the spleen, is related to the left dome of the diaphragm, where it separates the spleen from the like the left costo-diaphragmatic recess, right? And now coming to the medial relations. That is, the medial visceral relations are, if you see the upper part of the medial surface of the spleen, upper part of the medial surface of this, it is like more concave in nature. It is deeply concave, right? And this is the most concavity. This is the most concavity which is present in the spleen, whole spleen. If you take the total spleen, this is the most concave area. If you take the total spleen, this is the most concave area. Am I correct? This is the most concave area. So this concave area, most concave area in the upper part of the spleen, which lies between the superior border and the intermediate border, is for the gastric impression, where the fundus of the stomach lies here. Now coming to the another concavity, a shallow concavity here. And this concavity, which is lying between the inferior border and the intermediate border, is nothing but the impression for the left kidney. Left kidney. From here, you can see a nice triangular region here. And this triangular region is the region which is related to the left colic flexure, or we can call it as the splenic flexure of colon. This is the impression, right? And now if you move from there, you can nicely see a dip here. This is nothing but, this dip is the region for the pancreas, impression of the pancreas. So these are all the relations which you see in the spleen. But I said that you people didn't get a doubt, I don't know why. I said that the spleen occupies the left hypochondrium and also it extends into the epigastrium. Will it really extend into the epigastrium? Yes, it extends into the left epigastrium, because spleen is a mobile organ in the body. It moves on respiration. Whenever you breathe, it moves, keeps on moving. So how it moves is like, it is in the left hypochondrium. Whenever it is moving, breathing, what happens is like it will move in a direction which is going medially and towards the right iliac fossa. So it will be mobile, it will be moving like this. So that is the reason why the spleen is, like occupying the left hypochondrium, and also it extends into the epigastrium, right? And the speciality of the spleen is like, in the hilum of the spleen you are seeing the splenic artery. The splenic artery is tortuous in nature, like this. Okay? Why it is tortuous in nature? Because as the spleen is mobile, right? The splenic artery is tortuous in nature, so that like it will facilitate. Yeah, it will facilitate the mobility of this spleen, right? And also there is, in the hilum of the spleen, there is a splenic vein which goes on the posterior surface of the pancreas. Am I correct? Posterior surface of the pancreas, where it goes and joins with the superior mesenteric vein to form the portal vein on the posterior surface of the neck of the pancreas. This is all about the spleen.